Assume yes. All right. I'm calling it Menopause 101. Not particularly a course in menopause, just a review, the literature. I didn't know the level of knowledge that people would have on the call, but I assume just because I know everyone that's on that you guys have more than a basic understanding, so I can skim through some of that as we go. All right, so agenda for today, kind of some basic definitions, reviewing menopause in general, symptoms, and then looking at some of the current research, what we're finding. Luckily, the last 10 years or so, there's been a good bit, and we're learning more every day. And then we'll dive into some practical strategies and make sure that we have time at the end for Q&A. And as we're going along, if you have any questions, obviously it's just a smaller group, jump in at any time. All right, clinical definition of menopause is 12 consecutive months without a cycle. Average age of onset is about 51, but as I will point out repeatedly throughout this presentation, women, humans in general, are not textbook scientific studies. None of us are the same. None of us have the exact same symptoms, onset. Menopause starts at different times in different ways for everyone. So I am relaying the literature based on averages or based on the small studies, whether that's a lot of them had 10 participants, 13 participants. I think one of the larger ones had 30 participants. So again, we're really looking at small handfuls and groups. However, this is the best research that we have at the time. Perimenopause can start up to 10 years earlier. So that's, some as early as 35 to 40. Women are experiencing premenopausal symptoms and then going into menopause. And again, the textbook definition of 12 months without a cycle, seeing an OBGYN, they can, run hormone panel and start looking at more detailed tests to determine. I don't know that we need to do the 21-day cycle review for this group of people. Just looking at the differences between day one to day 15 on a hormonal level, and why that kind of explains what we feel in menopause. So at day one, which is the first day of your bleed, that's when estrogen and progesterone are the lowest. It's also when we feel the most like women in menopause will feel in terms of bloating, hunger issues, other GI issues, mood swings, depression, anxiety, trouble sleeping. Estrogen and progesterone help with all of those. And as a side note, a lot of times women that have horrible PMS symptoms, by adding progesterone into their diet, supplementing with progesterone, they see some of those PMS symptoms relieved. So then if you kind of flip to that side and looking at menopausal women, that's why a lot of physicians will recommend either hormone replacement therapy or some combination of estrogen and or progesterone. Most of the time we know now they'll do both. Estrogen and progesterone, as I will dive into, rule the show. Those hormones not only control our cycle, but also control a lot of other reactions going on in our body. Some of the symptoms, menopausal symptoms: hot flashes, night sweats, irritability, brain fog, even some claim early kinds of dementia, forgetfulness, trouble regulating hunger, weight gain, obviously, inability to put on or make muscle loss. See, what else am I missing? I mean, there's the list of symptoms are just fantastic. It's like one of those drug commercials. You may experience this, and this. And not that we have any men on the call, but men learning, sorry, not you two, men learning about menopause. Men do not experience this. This is just another joyful thing that women get to experience. Even men, when their testosterone declines, they do have different physiological symptoms, but nothing that is, I would say, equivalent to what women experience in menopause. So yay, yay to be female. It's just the gift that keeps on giving. Yeah.
Can you just go back one slide? Sorry,
Yeah.
I just want to understand. So you're saying in normal cycle, you were saying estrogen and progesterone are at their lowest in the first phase, in the follicular phase. Is that what you're saying? In
Yes.
a normal menstruating
cycle.
female.
Yes.
And then as they come into the luteal phase, progesterone and estrogen drop, or they go up in the luteal
They go
phase?
up. They go up in the luteal phase. So progesterone starts to rise with follicle stimulating hormone in order to prepare the uterus for the release of the egg and then implantation. And then after, if implantation doesn't occur, then that's when estrogen and progesterone drop, and the lining, that's when we start to bleed, and the lining, we release the lining, and the whole process starts over again.
Okay, so in menopause, estrogen and progesterone just fail to rise. Is that correct?
Correct.
You have a failure in production of those.
Fail to produce those. That's correct.
Okay, cool.
Yep. All right. So not specifically related to sport, but I think this is really important to understand the connection that we have when we're looking at symptoms, when we're looking at trying to understand why women feel a certain way when they're going through menopause, why they feel like they're fighting their body continually. It's very much going on kind of behind the scenes. I think the message, there's Dr. Lisa Marconi is an excellent physician and top researcher in the brain and Alzheimer's in relation to females, and looking at menopause and some of the causes. And a tagline that she has kind of cornered is menopause starts in the brain, not in the ovaries. And I think that's really important to remember, that connection, that it's not just all of a sudden your ovaries stop releasing eggs and that it's, that's the kind of beginning of menopause. So the brain and ovaries are connected via the HPG axis. Kind of think of that as like the telephone system, the brain communicating to your ovaries via hormones. So you have the brain is connected to the hypothalamus, which is in charge of many things. One of those is making estrogen and progesterone. So if your brain, if it's giving the signals like it should throughout adolescence and your childbearing years, your brain is telling your body, to your hypothalamus, to make estrogen and progesterone. That then in turn regulates how your ovaries function. As your brain stops producing and stops telling your hypothalamus to produce estrogen and progesterone, that's when the ovaries, in response, and then your body stops that normal monthly cycle. Your brain also, through the hypothalamus, is in charge of regulating body temperature, which is why when it stops, when that brain connection stops, that's why we have women going through menopause have such a hard time regulating body temperature and get night sweats and hot flashes. It's because they lose that ability. They're not producing estrogen, they lose that ability. The brain is also responsible if it's not telling the body to produce estrogen, estradiol specifically. That's the key to energy production. So in your brain. So if your body at kind of the cellular level, if you don't have that estrogen pushing your brain to use glucose for energy, that's why you start to feel low on energy. It's why you start to feel that brain fog. It's why you start to feel like your workouts aren't producing what they used to. So the brain really is sending all of these signals. The list goes on. The brain regulates through the brainstem that helps regulate sleep. So if you are experiencing disturbances in your sleep, that's relation to the brain and not having estrogen. You'll hear me talk about it. Estrogen really is the queen of a lot of reactions and things that are going on in your body. As estrogen production slows down, so does our metabolism. It also messes with hunger and satiety skills. Again, a lot of those symptoms and things that you feel at the beginning of your period. That's similarly why you start feeling them when your body no longer makes estrogen and progesterone. Let's see. Oh, estrogen and cortisol, or estrogen, but estrogen, estrogen helps regulate cortisol. So when we have less of it, that exacerbates our body's inability to manage cortisol, which then affects metabolism, insulin secretion, energy production, and that kind of utilization of carbohydrates. And if we even take that further, this is where the Alzheimer's component comes in. And this is why I really want to make sure for every one man that gets Alzheimer's, 2 women have Alzheimer's. So the rate is twice as high. And it's something they're now finding. It's not just because you are female, it's because as the brain stops making estrogen and progesterone, as the body stops, that affects all of these components in the brain, which then increases your risk for Alzheimer's disease. And so I think while it's important to understand what our bodies are doing athletically, it's also important to remember that Alzheimer's is a very big concern for older females. And so if you're not taking care of your brain, then you're not taking care of your body and just increasing your risk for a multitude of other things. That's where cardiovascular disease comes in. That's where certain kinds of cancers come in. So really understanding and placing that importance on brain health is important, which, like I said, if it's good for the brain, it's good for the body. They've showed the Mediterranean diet is the best in terms of preserving brain health and in turn heart health. If your cholesterol is high, which they see a lot in menopausal women, most likely because of that higher cortisol levels and metabolism issues, including phytoestrogens, looking at certain supplements, stress management, all of those things combined can help take care of your brain and also help reduce some of the risk of some of those common diseases. Yes, Scott, thanks for raising your hand.
That's all right. Couple of questions.
Yeah.
How if estrogen is getting lower,
Mm-hmm.
but men don't produce estrogen on the same level as women, but men aren't getting, how are they linking dropping estrogen to Alzheimer's if men have a lower occurrence of Alzheimer's, yet we don't produce as much estrogen? What are they talking about that in the literature?
So I don't know in this literature, they really were addressing the female component of it. But if I was having to look and kind of interpret, again, my interpretation of the data is that men are also not taking care of, like, Alzheimer's, for the most part, they're saying is inevitable for most people. Like, we are now living longer, our brains are aging, and if we're not taking care of them properly, men and women will get it. We see it more in women because it starts earlier because we don't have that protective estrogen. And I don't know why men don't need that as much. I don't know. Yeah,
it's hard to understand that. I'll have to see if I can find some information. And then in terms of phytoestrogens, what are you talking about there, and what supplements are you referring to in terms of good for the brain?
Yeah, thank you. So phytoestrogens are plant-based estrogens that mimic the qualities and characteristics of estrogen. That would be anything soy, so tofu, tempeh, edamame, flax seeds, sesame seeds, chickpeas. So, which is why I think that Mediterranean diet, which is kind of heavier on, it includes more kind of plant sterols and phytoestrogens naturally based on the foods that you would be consuming. That's where those are coming into play. And the old concern of phytoestrogens and soy increasing the risk of breast cancer, they have found is absolutely not true. Like, the amounts that you would have to be consuming to even put yourself at a low risk is so much higher than we would be consuming. But it also makes a point that when they say if you would like to protect your brain, 2 to 3 servings of phytoestrogens a day. So it's not just adding a little soy milk to your coffee or adding a scoop of ground flaxseed to your yogurt per se. It's a cup of almond milk or soy milk in the morning, whatever the, soy milk with maybe your breakfast. It's a plant-based yogurt. It's tofu or tempeh included into your meal at lunch or dinner. So it's something, sprinkling a serving of sesame seeds onto your salad that might also have tofu. So it's not just a here or there. If you want to kind of like we preach consistency with a diet, if you really do want to protect your brain and help mitigate some of those menopausal symptoms, it's 2 to 3 servings of phytoestrogens a day.
Actually, on that point, I was always interested in the soy and the link to breast cancer and whatnot. It's actually the reverse of what everything was said on social media. So actually, consumption of soy products, 1 to 2 servings per day, is actually protective as opposed to increasing the risk, which I thought was fascinating because it was always pushed to us, especially in like contact collision sports like rugby, avoid soy because it will make you estrogenic and so on. But it actually, most of the myths around it have been completely, sort of put to rest, thankfully. So guys like Charles Poliquin and that, rest in peace. But most of the stuff that he was sort of shouting about is actually being proven incorrect through randomized controlled studies and meta-analysis and whatnot.
Yeah, and I think I often forget, I'm surprised at the number of people that still, even though it's been, proven that it's not, that, that literature is false, the message I don't think has made it all the way out to the general public. And so, which is a shame because people are missing out on very beneficial elements of different foods that, not only edamame and tofu and all of those are good for the body for a host of other reasons. It's not just the phytoestrogen component. So it's a shame that people have been missing out or living in fear, as some have said.
And in terms of supplements for the brain, what are you referring to?
And these are supplements to help also, but specifically omega-3s for brain health. Turmeric is excellent for brain health.
Turmeric or curcumin?
Sorry, curcumin. Yes. Which most labeled here are under the turmeric. Like in the States, if you would like a curcumin supplement, most of them are listed as turmeric, and then you have to go read. Yeah.
Really?
I know.
And is the recommendation around 1,500 milligrams per day?
Thank you. Yes. Yes. And then in terms of brain health and body health, and I'll remind it at the end, but vitamin D, calcium are also 2 very important components. And as Scott and I have talked about many times, as we are finding out now, the brain protecting effects of creatine. So the importance of including creatine. And again, I know that if for nothing else, I would be taking creatine to protect my brain, even if there weren't the other beneficial components of that.
And did they mention dosages for omega-3s anywhere there?
Oh, they did.
Sorry to put you on the spot. And just while Elizabeth's thinking about that, I guess one thing that's not on here that I realized that is something talking about these amyloid plaques and the deposition is probably alcohol. We haven't put on there to remove anything, but I hate to say it, but the more you read about alcohol and the more you learn from a neuroscience perspective, alcohol is literally poison to the brain. And I know everyone, it's coming into holiday season and everyone's probably thinking, great, I can drink as much as I want, but it is one of those ones and honestly, personally, it's been a big thought process around alcohol and what it's doing to me. And I think, yeah, if you really want to listen to a good, and we can post it, the episode by Andrew Huberman on alcohol it's a bit of a game changer to listen to. It is 3 hours. So most of you sit on bikes for a while, so you can just stick it on and listen to it. But it is a bit of a game changer podcast. One episode I thought was outstanding in terms of just really highlighting the detrimental effects of alcohol to the body, and in particular the brain. So if anyone's interested in that, I'll pull it up while Elizabeth's talking.
And while you're pulling that up, he and Peter Attia did an excellent one on hormones. And I will only bring it up in relation to saying that you should think about hormone replacement therapy. It's a discussion to have with your doctor. But Andrew and Peter very clearly explain what HRT is, the benefits of doing it, and the fact that you should start it earlier rather than later. So even sometimes, in some cases, even before, like as you're going through perimenopause, before menopause actually starts, that's where you see the beneficial effects. So those 2 episodes, and I think the section that he and Peter do is part of one on hormones. And so it's only like 45 minutes of a 3-hour podcast, but worthwhile listening to. Very interesting. Very interesting. All right. Oh wait, Catherine has a question.
I love how Mickey's listened to it and gave up alcohol. It's like, it's actually, and I hate to use the pun, but it's very sobering.
So for some reason I can't see the chat. Did you?
I put it in. I put
the
chat
in. Okay.
Yeah, when you're presenting, you can't see the chat, but I'll let you know if anything else comes in.
Thank you. All right. So in terms of changes to the body and what the research has shown, which again, I don't like being the bearer of bad news, but these are all the things that happen to our bodies when going through menopause. So we see a reduced VO2 max, increase in sarcopenia, reduced blood volume, your aerobic enzymes are less abundant and effective. Heart stroke volume is reduced. You see weight gain. Oh, you can see I didn't put the reference piece in there. I didn't go back and fix that. And the driving component behind these, again, is that loss of hormones, the estrogen and progesterone, which we see the effects of estrogen on heart function, and then that loss of muscle through sarcopenia, which then influences VO2 max, aerobic enzymes, and obviously weight gain. So I think my point in pointing all of these out is if you are feeling and seeing changes in your training, it could be because of your training, but it very much does have something to do physiologically with what's going on in your body. So knowing that these changes are normal and expected can help you understand and regulate and speak with your coach about different ways to train and understanding why your body might not be performing the way that it used to.
And you obviously mentioned estrogen and progesterone, but what happens with testosterone in menopause? Is there a drop in testosterone as well with females?
No, females see about a consistent, we already obviously have less testosterone than men, but I think it was actually Peter Attia that pointed out that we still have more testosterone than we do estrogen in our body, even when we're making a lot of estrogen. So while we're lower than men in testosterone, we still do have there's more testosterone in our bodies than we think, which is why we do still have the ability to maintain muscle, build muscle. So no.
Because I know last week and some of the research I was reading was about the potential negative effects of HRT and dropping testosterone, which could then result in an increased propensity towards sarcopenia. I don't know if Andrew and Peter Attia talked about that in their HRT.
They did, and they were specifically referencing the negative effects of HRT were seen when it was started later. So at age 70, which apparently the reason they were looking at these studies, which is why I find it fascinating, is because they were trying to see if HRT prevented death and would increase lifespan. And so they were looking at women 70 years and older. They didn't look at women 55 because the study was only going to be 7 to 10 years. And so they needed, in order to get the outcome that they were looking for, they had to start with older women. So most of the data that we know about HRT is with women in their 70s and older. And now they're finding, if you look at the data from age 55 plus, the benefits very much outweigh the negative consequences. So I think in that case, it depends when you're taking it, when you start taking it as well. That would be the outliner.
And one more question on this, I find it very interesting. Sorry, everyone. I'm learning as much about this as everyone else. Obviously, this is in relation to females and their body and in relation to menopause, but how does it compare to men as they're aging? Like, is the reduction in VO2 max and reduction in blood volume and so on, is that like completely skewed in terms of magnitude as women hit menopause versus men of the similar age? Like, do you know that or not?
I honestly don't know that. I don't know if they've ever done a side-by-side study to look at that percentage.
Is it just aging?
Yeah,
I guess the question is
right.
it just age that is resulting in all this? And is that, I mean, it's a bit like we were having the discussion about this, the strength training for women versus their phase. And it's like, well, it doesn't actually make any difference pretty much from the research we show at the moment. Some minor, maybe study differences, but in a clinical practical setting, it's not making any difference. I just wonder, and again, if anyone knows, is the difference in what's happening to the women comparably different from what's happening with men? Mickey's got a hand up. So
yeah.
What are you saying, Mickey?
Unfortunately, I don't think I know the answer to that either. It is interesting. And, just from my coaching work with men, I mean, I would say, well, for men and women, it seems to be more of a quick drop, when women go through the menopause transition, in a few years afterwards, especially if they're not working VO2 max on a regular basis, as opposed to men. What I've seen is the older men that I've coached, it's kind of a gradual thing. But if they step away from training for a certain amount of time and are sort of not sedentary, but not having the structured training, they'll often come back and realize they've lost quite a bit. But that's just from coaching experience. I don't have any, hard data on that.
Yeah,
sorry.
cool. No, it's good. I mean, anecdotal is obviously, I think it's important, but it's, in the ranking of scientific evidence, it's the lowest. And so I think what Elizabeth and I should do is probably just see if the sad thing is there probably isn't the data on that. There may be some comparisons of age-matched gender stuff that we could look at, but it's probably not specific to layering those women in menopause. Although I guess if it's age matched and they're over 51, we could probably safely assume that most of the women would be in menopause. We'll come back. I've written some notes here and we'll come back and see if there's any research on that, because I think I think as much as anything, it could be really important for women. If men and women are actually losing at a comparable rate, then let's not get too, maybe you don't have to worry too much about the menopause, although obviously there's a lot of other symptoms and physiological effects of that. But maybe it's like, okay, well, it's age related, and what can we do to maximize that for men and women?
Totally.
It's very interesting. Good old age, aging. It's wonderful.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. Like, the sooner that maybe we could accept, if that's the case, that we're just going to get older and have all of these things, it's kind of like, okay, it's going to happen. And not to be mean to the men, but it would almost be a little bit nice if, yes, it happened to everybody. It
Yeah.
happened to all of us.
Yeah.
I think as you said, Elizabeth, though, like I think where men are lucky is I think those exaggerated or those extreme symptoms and signs that women unfortunately have to go through as a result of menopause, it accentuates, from my understanding, all of what goes on and just makes it so much harder.
Yes.
So
Yes. And that Dr. Lisa Marconi was saying that menopause almost acts as a trigger for any existing medical disposition that you're kind of predisposed to. So if you're already kind of predisposed to higher cholesterol, per se, genetically, menopause kind of is that trigger for activating the issues with higher cholesterol sooner. If you're kind of predisposed to different immune conditions because of that insulin sensitivity, because then, that's why so many women later in life say they have Hashimoto's, or gout even, which is a whole connection to uric acid. So menopause, just like you said, it exacerbates and kind of underlying medical conditions that we might have had. We start experiencing them sooner because it kind of it's like the domino effect. It pushes that first domino down. Whereas if we weren't going through that, it would have happened later.
And I think I'll give the analogy of like surgery. If you go into surgery in a deconditioned phase, often the outcome is worse down the line. And maybe it is a very good reason to try and get, before hitting 50. And I think this applies to men and women, is getting yourself in as good a health state as possible. I think if you're going in with pre-diabetes or, a degree of obesity or high blood pressure and so on, then it's probably just going to be a lot harder after menopause kicks in, I'd imagine. So
Yes.
I think it is just another good reason to really try and align your health with what your long-term sort of view is on your lifespan or your health span. So
Yep.
I just had a very quick question
Yeah.
for you, Elizabeth.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry. Just to go back to the HRT, when you said that the studies now show that starting it earlier is beneficial. In your research, have you seen that that's still starting early means still post-menopause? As I understand in my own brief reading of this, it's sort of like in perimenopause, they usually don't recommend HRT because of hormone fluctuation. So you don't want to add to the sort of chaos that's going on. And the treatment would be going on a birth control pill, which many of us, I've shied away from personally, just because it always seemed to just not work for me. So is that kind of what you have read as well in terms of HRT and how to deal with the chaos of hormones in the perimenopause state?
Yeah, great question. Yes. So the perimenopause, they're suggesting progesterone only if you're experiencing symptoms or if you're, some of those disturbances, if you will, or kind of PMS symptoms, the hot flashes. So progesterone only. But then once you start menopause, they're saying as soon as so as soon as you have confirmed that 12 months, have talked with your OBGYN, the sooner you start that, the better. And the studies that they were speaking of specifically looked at starting it at the beginning of menopause or starting it 5 years in. And those first 5 years are crucial, not only for the success of the HRT and mitigating those symptoms, but then also in preventing sarcopenia, weight gain, issues with muscle building, cholesterol, those kinds of things. So the earlier, the better is the research that they did and then that I kind of followed up on.
Okay, cool. That's really helpful to know.
Yeah. And again, I am by no means a physician. I do not feel qualified to tell anyone to get HRT, but I do think it's something now that I will absolutely speak to an OBGYN about and understand, okay, at 51-ish, 52, should I be looking at and starting this? So I think if anything, it should trigger a conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so looking at some practical components. When we're speaking specifically about your training, the literature, the research, and I would say anecdotally from anecdotally, the components that you want to and will need to incorporate. I know we've all heard it before, but lifting heavy is kind of the #1 training recommendation. So not only is that going to help with bone loss and kind of maintaining, as Scott and I have said, the importance of kind of preventing or delaying osteopenia or osteoporosis, lifting heavy and HIIT sessions can help with metabolic syndrome, can help with muscle building, which then can mitigate some of that weight gain, type 2 diabetes, cholesterol issues, heart disease. So the combination of lifting heavy and higher intensity sessions, as opposed to the longer, slower endurance, which I know, as most of you are, this is like, Scott told you you can't drink, I'm telling you, you can't do long and slow endurance. It's pretty much, we're ruining the whole picture for, I think, and this is where a discussion, the importance of having a discussion with your coach as to how you can adjust your training to incorporate more heavy lifting and higher intensity sessions and still get that benefit and still be able to compete and do what you love. And again, it very much could be, well, maybe I don't do 5 Ironmans a year. Maybe I do 1, or maybe 1 year I do an Ironman and the next year I do a couple Olympics or 70.3s so that you can switch up that training. And if you are experiencing some, the weight gain and the sarcopenia and some of those, then, I'm not saying it is, but then maybe long distance triathlon isn't right for your body at this time. And so there could be potentially other things to look into. Another key component is the longer recovery. Our bodies, and this might work for men also, but as we get older, we need longer periods of recovery. Not only to help our bodies be able to build that muscle again and rebuild and repair, but also because cortisol levels are high, and without that estrogen there to help lower cortisol, it is going to linger longer, and we are not going to be able to do the work and the training, and that elevated levels of cortisol, increased stress, increased metabolic syndrome. So it's kind of a vicious cycle. I think the natural thing, and we'll talk about this a little bit with diet, but the natural thing is, oh, I'm gaining weight with menopause, I'm not sleeping well, it's this, I'll work out harder. Obviously something isn't right. If I train more, then my body will be better, I'll lose that weight, et cetera, et cetera. We're finding out you're only exacerbating the problem by not taking the proper recovery time and doing those longer sessions. They're just not the ideal training setting for your body at this time. And off of that, kind of considering cyclical training. So right now, I think a lot, again, I'm not a triathlon coach, but I've been doing it long enough. The traditional cycle is, either a 4-week cycle where it's kind of 3 weeks of hard work, 1 week, somewhat lighter recovery. Where you're looking at cyclical training is, instead of that 4-week cycle, potentially a 3-week cycle. So you do 2 hard weeks and then 1 recovery week. 2 hard weeks, 1 recovery week. Or even on your age, it could be, several hard days and then several easy days, and then a longer stretch of harder days and then a longer stretch of recovery. So really changing that training modality and recovery modality will help. All right. Next up, we have in-session and race fueling and some of the differences there. And this is where I think not only is it interesting, but it's also highly individual. And we are learning every day kind of the specifics as to why these things are important. We're seeing that they are, and we're learning as we go as to why they are important. So nutrient timing, if you're going to get anything right, protein intake and nutrient timing are going to be really important. And that nutrient timing component is because the need to lower cortisol, to increase recovery, and to give your body, like, it needs that extra time. And so as food, Scott and I have said, the importance of eating, the importance of fueling your body properly, no eating before, eating after, eating protein regularly throughout the day, maintaining a consistent, healthy diet, high in phytoestrogens, Mediterranean style eating, is going to be important for you, not only in your sessions, but also in recovery. And then as those will lead to race fueling. So Scott had found a great study. I listed it below. It's the second one on the protein requirements. And I think something that, we talk about the importance of carbohydrates before, during, and after your training. In menopausal women, especially, protein before and after is very important. And they found the recommended, 0.32 to 0.38 grams per kilogram. So for a 130-pound female, that's about 22 grams of protein before and after your strength training sessions, or any of the higher intensity, harder sessions that you're going to be doing. So if you're doing strength training in the morning, a slice of toast with almond butter isn't going to get you that 22 grams. So you might want to be looking at maybe a yogurt, maybe some oats with protein powder stirred in, something that contains around, again, depending on your weight, 15 to 30 grams of protein before, and we've been very good about having that after. But a reminder in the importance of nutrient timing and getting that protein in before and after.
And just on that study, just so everyone's clear, because the title might be confusing to people, it was for premenopausal women. And what I was saying to E is, what's very interesting with that study is this is for premenopausal women, where they were finding, like, the RDI, and there's another acronym they had, which was about the estimated intake of protein. But effectively, it was saying at least 1.6 to 1.8 grams is sort of the minimum threshold for premenopausal women who are athletes. And so if you then extrapolate that and think, well, protein demands for older athletes actually increases, you start to say, well, certainly for a postmenopausal female, that you certainly don't want to be going below 1.6 grams, which sort of ties in with what we talked about last week when we were talking about protein requirements. So I think it's just, some of the evidence is lacking in the research, especially with menopausal women. But I think you've got to use some of the information we have in relation to premenopausal women, which, again, there's not a whole lot of research to support that either. But, I think the big take home here is you need protein, and you need a lot of it. And most of you will be under consuming the protein.
Excellently said. And end scene. Thank you very much.
That's it.
All right, so I'm gonna come back to the fructose glucose one. Increasing sodium. So potentially what worked before, whether you were adding sodium here and there to water bottle, different electrolyte mixes. So estrogen, form of estrogen, actually helps your body reabsorb and store water. So when estrogen declines, that's why you may, so if it's not being reabsorbed, if your body's not storing it properly, that's why you might experience that bloating, gut distress, feeling that your body, having different lower levels of electrolytes, which is where that magnesium ties in. So it's something to be mindful of, that most in the studies that they did, menopausal women needed to increase sodium consumption. And as Scott said earlier, that alcohol and caffeine because caffeine affects cortisol levels. If you are lowering or removing those, yeah, I'm taking away caffeine also, sorry. If you are removing those, increasing water intake as well. So minimum of 2 liters a day is what they found for menopausal women, which depending on how much water you're drinking, you might be getting that easily already, but definitely something to be mindful of as athletes that are sweating and losing water, in addition to what untrained menopausal women are experiencing. All right, the fructose glucose. So this is, why do we say fructose and not, or why do we say avoid fructose and look at the other types of fuel? So with your body's kind of reduced ability, as estrogen drops, you have the reduced ability to utilize carbohydrates. So post-menopausal women can't store excess energy from fructose in subcutaneous fat like premenopausal women can, which then means that those, that's more fatty acid in the bloodstream, which can lead to metabolic issues. Also, if you're not absorbing them, if you're not utilizing the fructose, then that results in gut rot and those uncomfortable feelings. So if for your entire life, you've been someone that says, oh, gels of any kind work for me, I've never had a problem. And then all of a sudden, as you're starting to go through menopause, those same things aren't working. That's very much because your body is losing that ability to process and store fructose like it did when you were younger. So looking to potentially switch what kind of in-session and race fueling you're using. A great example would be endurance tap. It's one of the reasons we love it. Endurance tap is a glucose sucrose, the untapped maple, either one of those, that maple syrup mix, plus endurance tap has the ginger in it and some sodium. So it's a win-win all around.
And just on that point, I guess what is and what may be a factor here as well is that obviously in terms of using these multiple transportable carbs like fructose in combination with glucose is really only required when you're getting up, certainly over, 70 grams an hour of consumption, somewhere between that 60 and 70 grams. If you're going well above that, then yes, the need for fructose may be required in order for the body to absorb that. But again, maybe as athletes are getting a bit older, maybe they're not going as quick, maybe they're not actually utilizing or consuming actually beyond that 60 to 70 grams an hour. So it, again, using specific products to what your body is actually from a physiological standpoint, but also from a practical standpoint, it is a consideration. So dropping back to just glucose only products may be something to consider if you're only consuming around that 60 grams an hour. And although we have always said that, it's just maybe another added factor for menopausal women to consider. Yep. As maybe pace and power drops and total consumption and need for those extra amounts of calories drops as well. Exactly.
And while we're on fructose, I find this really interesting. So estrogen helps your body excrete uric acid. Fructose causes uric acid production. So when estrogen production declines, you're not excreting that uric acid as well, which can lead to non-fatty liver disease, which can lead to issues with your gut microbiome issues. And now I understand in the research why older women are more likely to get gout than older men, because our ability to get rid of that uric acid is diminished. So just something to remember in your daily diet when you're looking at fructose, limiting or looking at some of those lower GI foods to use as your carbohydrates, vegetables primarily on a daily diet, which again, back to the Mediterranean diet, the benefit of having those either complex carbohydrates that have fiber in them or looking at vegetables as your carbohydrate sources.
And is that referring to fructose in the form of processed fructose though? like as
Yes.
in high fructose corn syrup versus say a banana?
Yes, correct.
Because I think that's really important to just, because people are going to say, oh, fructose, I need to avoid it. Oh, that's fruit. Like I can't imagine like eating an orange is going to have a significant impact on uric acid production.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely correct. In any kind of processed, which
Okay,
unfortunately,
so
a
it's
lot,
processed fructose.
yep, a lot of processed sports products, even bars, have, some of the high fructose corn syrup or some of those processed sugars in them.
Because I think that's a good example of when research gets
Mhm.
taken out of context. Like, people will say, oh, fructose is bad for menopausal women. And then someone will jump on the no fruit for women sort of bandwagon. And then suddenly, a mandarin will kill you.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's just important to remember this. We're talking ultra processed and processed forms of fructose, which unfortunately are found in a lot of the gels and sports drinks, but certainly consideration and something. If you're concerned about that, then certainly reach out to Elizabeth or myself about your personal sort of blight with these things.
Yeah, and I think too, just the multitude of things that estrogen affects in your body, I don't think we pay that kind of enough attention and understand, and it's no wonder why female bodies, as they're going through menopause, really do experience substantial changes. And just the fact that when estrogen drops or that production is not there, why we're experiencing all of these things, why we have carbohydrate sensitivity, why we have lower carbohydrate recommendations, why we have problems with gut, brain fog, all of those things, because estrogen is so important. And I think to flip it around, why Scott and I have spent such time on low energy availability and the importance of having your cycle and having regular estrogen and progesterone production as younger females in those bone forming years. It's really full circle. The human body is designed, to take care of itself if we are giving it what it needs. So proper fueling at all stages of life is important. It's not chronic underfueling is a problem, whether you're 13, 26, 40, 65. No one should be doing it. Please eat. All right, and just kind of to tie in a bit again, that diet does matter in not just overall health, but in helping to eliminate some of those symptoms. Tart cherry juice, for example, has been shown to really help with hot flashes. The Mediterranean diet and its tie with gut health. Again, a lot of menopausal women are experiencing gut issues, phytoestrogens. The importance, Scott and I have spoken about this before, of leucine is the primary trigger for MPS, so recovery, adaptation. Even if you're giving yourself long bouts of recovery, if you're not including leucine in your diet, then you're not going to be seeing that recovery. The importance of omega-3s, vitamin D, calcium. And again, food first. It's always a food first approach with us. But if you've had your blood work done and you know that you are low in vitamin D, calcium is low, if your cholesterol is high, all of these components, they can be handled with diet, and then you should look to add these supplements in. The importance of creatine, and as Scott and I have said, limiting or removing alcohol and caffeine. Sorry, but I'm not really, because you'll thank me when you're like healthy and 95. All right, key messages. Brain health is crucial because it is the driving force behind not just the symptoms that we're experiencing, but the production of estrogen and progesterone. Increasing your protein intake, and not just increasing it significantly. Better nutrient timing, so fueling before and after your sessions. Do not chronically underfuel. Do not, because and again, I know it's easy for me to say when I'm not the one gaining 5 pounds, but 5-pound weight gain over the course of going through menopause is very normal, very accepted. So don't in relation to, oh, I'm gaining weight, and especially in the middle, we go as women, we go from storing it in kind of our thighs and butt to then storing it like men do, more of that visceral fat in the gut. That's why a lot of women will start to say, I've never had a belly before. And, you know, where we distribute fat and store it changes with menopause. So not responding to that by diet, by crash dieting or under fueling, because that's only going to do the opposite. Grams per kilogram of protein is important as opposed to daily percentage of. So really nailing that number, you know, above that 1.6 threshold, like Scott said, daily, consistently. Carb selection being important. We are more carb sensitive when going through menopause. So looking at those complex carbohydrates, fiber-rich fruit and veg is where a lot of your carbohydrates are going to need to come from. Potentially increasing sodium, and then changing that stimulus. Heavy strength training, higher intensity, longer recovery. All right, I've talked long enough. To open roundtable discussion. Questions, things you've read, maybe things you've seen.
Do you want to just stop your share,
Yeah.
just so then everyone can see it. Right? Very good. It was very interesting. I certainly don't know enough about menopause to warrant being an expert or commenting on it too much. I think it's something I need to read more about. And obviously we do have a fairly significant proportion of athletes who are approaching that age. And I think it's something we've talked about in terms of trying to make the program more and more specific to certain types of athlete as well. And I think we can, with changes to messaging and that for those women who maybe are in menopause, I think we could make the messaging clearer for specificity for what is required. It will just take time, but I believe it is possible. And I think with assistance from athletes who are going through menopause, I think we can make the program even more specific to you. So just be patient on it, and we'll certainly look at increasing the messaging and certain foods to eat and supplements to take at certain times, and ensuring things like the protein is on point, which I'm pretty comfortable with the protein intake, but making sure the messaging around making sure it's very clear that you do take in the amount of protein before and after sessions is on point, I think is something we should be able to easily do as well.
Yeah. So looking at some of the questions Martha asked, to clarify, the 0.32 to 0.38 grams pre and post workout applies to all workouts or just strength training? So the study was done on resistance training. However, I think it can be applied to all. And I think that's only going to help you make sure you meet your protein requirements during the day anyway. So just because that study wasn't done particularly on swim, bike, and run, I think it correlates very closely, and you would probably see the same result. So
I would just say on that though, if you've got a run session, especially a run like 60 to 90 minutes and it's Z3 or above, I wouldn't go and smash like a decent amount of protein beforehand, because you'll probably feel very sick. Even 20 grams could be too much to send. Maybe just have like, a small amount, but ensure that the post-session feed is certainly up around 40 grams, I would say, and balance that out. If you're going into the longer duration, high intensity sessions, then certainly around that amount, 20 grams, or even if it was 20 grams. I was doing the calculations. I was like, so if I'm an 80 kilo athlete, which is what, 180 something pounds, that would still only have me at 0.3 of a kilo. It's something around 24 grams. So, most women are a fair bit lighter than me. So the actual amount of that protein intake before a session is actually fairly low based on that. So it's not too bad. Just take 10% of your body weight and times it by 3, and they'll give you an indication.
there you go. That's a good math trick. Thanks.
There you go. So there you go.
It's like that. It's new math. All right, let's see. Trish said, I know food first, but do you have an opinion on perfect aminos for additional protein? I was on the perfect amino kick for a while just because I listened to all that marketing and hype, even though I knew better. I would say, and Scott can jump in, I think if you're eating a balanced diet and you have some sort of protein supplement, a whey protein supplement, or a plant-based that adds amino acids to it, you're good. And that it's like perfect aminos is a bit overhyped. So I would say,
Is that Rob Wolf's company, Perfect Aminos, or is that Real's? I will sort of say something. This is actually quite interesting. It's only new research, but about amino acids. It's something, there seems to be something negative with consumption of non-essential amino acids and people who are aged over 60 and potentially they're not required. So this is where maybe an amino acid stack of essential amino acids could be beneficial to those individuals who are over 60. It's like maybe splitting hairs though. Like, honestly, I think you'd probably use something like an amino acid supplement if you're eating a poor quality protein meal or diet. So if you're maybe a vegetarian or a vegan and you're unsure whether the total amino acid profile of your meal is suffice, then yes, maybe supplementing with a scoop or 2 scoops of the amino acids, essential amino acids, could be beneficial. I think if you're an omnivore and you're getting in like the amount of protein we're telling you to take in, I'd be pretty comfortable that your net protein balance and, you know, muscle protein synthesis and that should be on point, especially if you're also lifting weights. I don't know. Maybe save your money if you're eating enough. But yeah. I mean, there is, look, I think like all this stuff, like it's individualized. Like if you take those perfect aminos or Reals or whatever they're called, like all these different brands of essential amino acids, and it improves your performance or your recovery and you feel better. If it's placebo, does it? I don't know. It doesn't matter.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Certainly, it's not going to cause you any harm taking in some essential amino acids, put it that way. But if those perfect aminos cost $60 for 20 serves, I know which way I'd be going. I'd be focusing on food.
And I remember those,
and
they do not take, like, I chewed them at one point. It was so bad. Oh, it was so bad. They just weren't great.
I mean, essential amino acids will not mix with anything.
No.
So just factor that in. They float on top and they look like glitter. So.
Yeah, they're really bad. Anne Marie asks, how many sessions a week minimum recommended for HIIT and lift heavy? The lift heavy sessions were 3 per week. And the HIIT, I think, was 2 sessions a week. And Scott, you can, I know we talked about it in body comp.
Yeah, I think it's going to depend on your total training volume. I think the really important thing with lift heavy, and I see this all the time in social media, is like everyone's like, lift heavy, lift heavy. It's like lifting heavy is relative to the amount of repetitions you're doing. So if you're doing, like, if you're trying to improve body comp, lifting heavy to 8 to 15 reps is what's going to improve muscular hypertrophy and probably improvements in body composition. That's still lifting at, say, 80% of your 1 RM. If you're talking about lifting heavy in season, you're talking about lifting probably 95 plus of your percentage of 1 RM, which is now going down into rep range of maybe 1 to 4 reps with 3-minute rest and probably multiple sets of 4 to 5. But in this part of the season, you're talking about doing maybe 8 to 15 reps, 45 seconds rest, 3 to 4 sets, big compound lifts. Like, understanding the nuances of what lift heavy means, I think, is really important for athletes to understand as well. So you're still lifting heavy relative to the reps you're doing. I think that's the big important point here.
Thank you.
Take creatine every day. Doesn't matter when you take it.
There you go.
Theoretically, there is some scientific changes taking it post-workout compared to pre. Again, probably Not clinically, probably statistically significant, but clinically not that much difference. So just take it in your shake after your workout. That's when I would say.
Yep.
Definitely don't take it pre, because you'll probably throw up. I've done that before.
And yes, Mickey, thank you for pointing that out. She says, I would also like to add, you need to have really good form before lifting heavy. Super easy to get injured. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, positively.
And I'll second that on Mickey. And it's actually something I've personally been working really hard on, is just doing full range, like ass to floor squats and dropping the range down, but going through, 8 to 12 reps. And even with a lighter load, it's relative to the intensity of the lift and the range of motion. It makes a big difference. So lift through full range, even if you're using a lighter weight, you'll still get a lot of benefit from it. And you'll probably end up increasing max lifts in the end anyway, well past what you did, because your form's going to be much better.
Great.
Cool. Great session, Really enjoyed that. Hope everyone else did. I'm the male in the group, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So, and Jay, sorry. But yeah, really interesting. I think hopefully we build on this, and I'll leave you as the lead instigator in.
I'm now. We've like opened up Pandora's box. I have calls scheduled. Like I emailed this Dr. Marconi. I'm like, I need to have a discussion. It's not only because it's coming for me in several years, but also because it's just really fascinating. The research is really fascinating.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I think we delve into it further, and try and make it even better for everyone who's getting close to or going through menopause.
And Martha, thank you very much. Appreciate the feedback. Okay, you bet. And Jonathan put in the chat, if you guys could fill the survey out afterwards, always helpful and appreciative. And any questions I didn't answer, or topics you guys want to hear about in the next one. And we'll talk about it for sure.
Perfect. Well, thanks everyone. Well done,
Yeah.
Thanks all.